Way back in 2014, I visited Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and it was freaking awesome. I went through the sprawling battlefield and most of the museums and attractions in town, including the Gettysburg Museum of History, which is a personal favorite, but sadly 3 of the museums I visited no longer exist. So in this video commemorating the 160th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, I want to take a look at 2 of these now extinct classic Gettysburg attractions. Now I was quite young when I visited, this is way before I was making YouTube videos, although I do recall that I wanted to make a video of this trip, but my camera was kind of trash, and I didn't have a computer at that time, so it would be several more years before I could start experimenting with that. Therefore, this will just be a picture slideshow. We will start out at the Soldiers National Museum, which was located inside the old Gettysburg Orphanage on Baltimore Street. This building served as General O.O. Howard's headquarters, so it has importance relating to the battle that took place around it. There was a sharpshooter unit stationed upstairs, and they would fire at Confederates hiding here on the south side of town. After the war, this was turned into the Soldiers' Orphanage, which has a shady history. I believe the facade has been significantly altered since the closure. Google Street View indicates that the portico has been removed. That probably wasn't there in 1863. The Soldiers National Museum opened up in this building in the 1950s, and it did not seem like it had changed much over the decades. About 10 years before that museum opened, it was home to a different museum created by a famous actor named Cliff Arquette, who is known for a comedic character named Charlie Weaver. He'd play him in different radio and TV shows, so it was called the Charlie Weaver Museum, but it did not last long. I love old-fashioned museums, so I thought this place was glorious. I'll admit it was a bit dated, but I think that adds to the charm. Much of the museum was just a series of cases with all sorts of war artifacts. It was a fairly run-of-the-mill military museum, unlike most Gettysburg museums. This one expanded into other wars such as World War II. There are lots of toy soldiers in this case representing the Napoleonic Wars. So clearly the Soldiers National Museum went way beyond American warfare. There were even some replications of medieval armor. Those are Zulu figurines. That's an American Revolution display. Of course, a significant portion of the display was dedicated to the Civil War. They had a lot of miniature toys and replica caps. There were over 5,000 miniatures in the collection. As mentioned, I was quite young and not very skilled with a camera when I was here, so I apologize if some of these are really bad. I wish I had higher quality documentation of this now defunct museum. Alright, here's a case full of authentic Civil War relics. I believe all these artifacts were auctioned off after the closure of the museum, so the collection is totally scattered now. That is fairly unique. A Union and Confederate bullet that collided in midair. And there are some bones of soldiers who died during the battle that are lodged with bullets. A lot of these were found in the early 1900s. They did have a super cheesy old school diorama of a Confederate campsite to walk through. I really enjoyed that. These are not wax figures. Wax figurines were very common when this museum would have opened, but they actually opted for wood carvings. That's still terrifying. I will also mention that shortly before I visited in June of 2014, the American Civil War Wax Museum closed down. That was also an original roadside attraction from the 50s. Gettysburg has lost a lot of great attractions over the years. In the 1990s, the museum got a hold of some great Civil War battle dioramas. That's Fort Sumter. Here is First Bull Run. They use the northern terminology for it here, though this battle was pretty humiliating for the Union. Here's a scene of the intense battle between the Monitor and the Merrimac ironclads. Here's Bloody Antietam, the scene at Burnside Bridge. And of course, the Battle of Gettysburg. That looks like Pickett's charge on the third day of the battle. Here is a Confederate cannon position atop Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a position above the clouds that the Union troops were able to take. Here are the scorched remains of Atlanta, Georgia. That's Admiral Farragut charging Mobile Bay. Damn the torpedoes. That is a Union campsite in winter during the siege of Petersburg, Virginia. And the final miniature diorama is a sad Confederate soldier after surrendering at Appomattox Courthouse. As mentioned, this was the Soldiers' Orphanage, which ran pretty well with good funding in the immediate post-war years, but it soon turned into a nightmare for the poor orphans here. In 1870, a woman named Rosa J. Carmichael was hired as the orphanage matron, and there were terrible allegations against her of abuse which turned out to be true. She would throw bad children into this dungeon here and chain them up for excruciating hours without food or water. That's a photograph of the shackles she would use to chain up children in the dungeon. She was eventually arrested and fined for child cruelty, but apparently the abuse continued here until the sheriff finally closed it down. The old orphanage is considered to be haunted, and today ghostly images of Gettysburg ghost tours are located in this building. But sadly, the perhaps antiquated Soldiers National Museum closed down at the end of 2014, so I visited in its final months of operation. Just down the street was another amazing Gettysburg roadside attraction owned by the same company, the Hall of Presidents and First Ladies. Now that was a true gem, so I have a separate video dedicated to that, which is linked in the description. By the way, the building in between the two extinct attractions is now the Civil War Tales attraction, which has miniature Civil War dioramas, but everyone is a cat. I guess people's interests have changed over the years. I do really hope that Civil War Tales sticks around, because I would really like to see that. The other museum that I'm going to feature is the General Lee's Headquarters Museum. It was a privately owned and operated museum located inside the house that was used by General Robert E. Lee as his headquarters during the Battle of Gettysburg. The house itself was built in 1834 and was actually co-owned by Thaddeus Stevens, an important Pennsylvania statesman known for his adamant opposition to slavery. Stevens did not live here though. It was rented out to a woman known as Widow Thompson, who apparently did not appreciate the rebels taking over her house, but she said General Lee was a gentleman. I do think it's funny that Lee chose the house owned by Stevens. He may not have known that, but still that's an interesting turn of events. This house was first opened to the public as a museum in 1922, so that's over 100 years ago now. Back then it was known as the Lee Museum. From my understanding, it was largely a display of random battle artifacts, so I am not sure how different the rendition of the museum I visited was from the original recipe. On July 2nd, a door from this house was removed to be used as a table map by General Lee, and that was the lock of the door. Here are the boards from the house's shed. The kitchen and parlor room was set up to how it may have looked during the battle, with a cardboard cutout of General Lee. From my understanding, some furnishings in this room are original. That table is original to the house, and was used by Generals Lee, Longstreet, Early, and Ewell to eat dinner on July 1st. Those are some snare drums and fatigue caps, including one worn by an unfortunate man whose head was grazed by an exploding shell, although he did survive, so I guess he's pretty lucky. There's a cardboard cutout and possibly the saddle of Union Major General John Reynolds, who led the Iron Brigade at the opening of the Battle of Gettysburg. However, he was shot and killed 300 yards from this house. That is the uniform of Captain Theodore H. Howell of the 153rd Pennsylvania Infantry. He would have been under the command of General Howard, whose headquarters was the Soldiers National Museum. Captain Thomas L. Livermore used that short sword in a practical joke during the battle when he traded his broken sword there with someone else's sword just before the battle started. When his friend pulled out this sword during the battle on July 2nd, he didn't even notice a chunk of the sword was gone until later on. He did live to think that the prank was quite funny apparently. This case contains a piano cover, knife, and fork that were taken by a Union soldier from Arlington, Robert E. Lee's home across the Potomac from Washington, D.C. There's also a book and glasses that were taken from Jefferson Davis's home, and a piece of Stonewall Jackson's house. Clearly I did not get a good picture of this, but that cloth says "We mourn the loss of President Lincoln." This museum displayed a wide assortment of Civil War relics. As we've seen, some of them had interesting backstories. After reading some placards that I did have decent photographs of, this museum's presentation struck me as pretty objective and not pushing lost cause or narratives. The General Lee's Headquarters Museum closed sometime in late 2014 or early 2015, so about the same time as the Soldiers National Museum, and I'm not sure what happened to the artifacts inside. If you happen to know anything about the fate of the artifacts that were here, then please leave a comment in the comments section, because I had forgotten they actually had some pretty cool artifacts. But the good news in this case is that the headquarters and the grounds around it were purchased by the Civil War Trust for $5.5 million, and they have since restored General Lee's headquarters and the area around it to a more historically accurate appearance. That area immediately around the house was definitely commercialized. It appears that the old motel surrounding it has been demolished. It is still possible to go inside. I wonder if it looks a lot different now, but I look forward to visiting it again someday. I definitely hope to visit and film Gettysburg sometime in the near future. I really want to do an in-depth look at the battlefields, along with the various museums and attractions around town. It is saddening that so many vintage attractions have been lost in Gettysburg within the ever-changing tourism environment, but I am glad I went when I did, so I could see these museums. I definitely wish I could have been in Gettysburg for the 160th anniversary events. I'll plan on going to the 175th anniversary in 15 years. Thank you for watching this throwback video. If you enjoyed it, then please consider subscribing to my channel, and also it would be great if you could click the like button. I have hundreds of other videos featuring museums and other attractions around the country, including some that are no longer with us. Also, let me know in the comments if you ever had a chance to visit these museums. Thanks for watching!